The air in Charleston, thick with the sweet scent of jasmine and the salty promise of the sea, was alive with the buzz of creation. Julian Vance stood on the skeletal framework of what would become the Eleanor, the flagship hotel of the Vance Hospitality Group. Beside him, his 10-year-old daughter Seraphina clutched his hand, her eyes wide with the same wonder that fueled his own. This wasn't just a building. It was a testament to a shared dream, a symphony of steel and ambition, orchestrated by his brilliant wife, Eleanor. She saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, a tapestry of luxury and unforgettable experiences. Her vision was their North Star, guiding every blueprint, every acquisition, every bold decision that had cemented their family as Charleston's emerging hospitality dynasty. "She's going to be the most beautiful hotel in the world, right, Daddy?" Seraphina's voice was a hopeful whisper against the clang of construction. Julian knelt, his gaze meeting hers. "The most beautiful in the universe, my love, just like your mother." Those were the golden years, the years of shared laughter over blueprints spread across the dining room table, of celebrating milestones with champagne toasts and ice cream sundaes, of watching Eleanor command boardrooms with a grace and intelligence that left everyone in awe. Seraphina grew up in this world. Her playground, the lobbies of their burgeoning hotels, her lullabies, the hum of a thriving business. She absorbed it all: the art of a deal, the importance of a personal touch, the relentless pursuit of excellence that was the Vance family signature. Then, in a screech of tires and a flash of shattered glass on a rain-slicked highway, the symphony stopped. The fatal car accident that stole Eleanor from them didn't just break their hearts. It shattered their world. The vibrant color that had defined their lives bled into a monochrome of grief. Julian, the charismatic visionary, became a ghost haunting the halls of the empire he and his wife had built. The North Star had vanished, leaving him adrift in a cold, dark sea of despair. Seraphina, now 23 and a recent business school graduate, found her own grief eclipsed by the urgent need to save her father, and by extension, the company. She put her own dreams on hold, stepping into the void her mother had left. She became her father's anchor, his memory, his drive. While he navigated the suffocating fog of loss, she took the helm of Vance Hospitality Group, her mother's lessons, her only guide. She worked tirelessly, her days a blur of meetings, and her nights a silent vigil, watching over a father who barely recognized the powerhouse she had become. Years melted into a grueling rhythm of work and quiet survival. Under Seraphina's steady hand, the Vance Hospitality Group didn't just survive. It flourished, growing into a formidable multi-million-dollar enterprise. She was her mother's daughter, her acumen undeniable. Julian, meanwhile, had found a fragile peace. He was a presence in the company, a figurehead, but the fire that had once defined him was gone, replaced by the quiet embers of memory. He began to date, a series of polite, forgettable dinners that Seraphina encouraged, hoping to see a flicker of his old self. But his heart remained a fortress, its gates sealed by the ghost of his one true love. And then Isabella Dubois appeared. Bella, as she insisted on being called, was a whirlwind of Parisian chic and calculated charm. She was an art consultant introduced to Julian at a gallery opening. Where other women had tiptoed around his grief, Bella charged in, speaking of Eleanor with a familiarity that was both unnerving and, to Julian, intoxicating. She seemed to understand his loss, to see the man he had been, not just the shadow he had become. Julian started bringing her around. It was a subtle shift, but to Seraphina it was a seismic one. The other women had been confined to restaurants and theaters. Bella was brought into their home, into the heart of their world. Seraphina's instincts screamed. Bella's compliments were too effusive, her questions about the business too pointed, her eyes lingering on financial reports left on the study desk. She was a beautiful, venomous snake, and Seraphina felt as though she were the only one who could see her poised to strike. "She's just so alive, Sarah," Julian had said one evening, a boyish excitement in his eyes that Seraphina hadn't seen in a decade. "She makes me feel alive again." Seraphina forced a smile, a cold dread coiling in her stomach. "I'm glad you're happy, Dad." But she wasn't glad. She was terrified. She saw the performance, the carefully constructed facade, and knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the shadow had fallen over their house.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
The Julian who emerged from the cocoon of Bella's affection was a stranger to Seraphina. The quiet, introspective man who wore his grief like a well-tailored suit was gone. In his place was a man who chased youth with a desperate, reckless abandon. He started frequenting Charleston's most ostentatious nightclubs, places he'd once dismissed as vulgar. His wardrobe, once a collection of classic, understated elegance, was now filled with designer labels that screamed for attention. He bought a cherry-red sports car, a garish beast that looked absurd parked in the driveway of their stately home. He was spending money with a profligacy that bordered on manic, all under the approving gaze of Bella, who was always draped on his arm, a glittering parasite. Seraphina watched this transformation with a growing sense of horror. This wasn't her father. This was a caricature, a puppet whose strings were being pulled by a master manipulator. She tried to talk to him, to appeal to the man she knew was still buried beneath the layers of expensive cologne and false bravado. "Dad, this isn't you," she pleaded one evening, cornering him in his study. "The late nights, the spending. Mom would have." "Don't you dare bring your mother into this," he snapped, his voice sharp, his eyes clouded with a mixture of defensiveness and Bella's influence. "Eleanor would have wanted me to be happy. Bella makes me happy. Can't you just accept that?" "I can't accept her trying to get her claws into our business." Seraphina's voice rose, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "She's been asking about the trust, Dad. She's been talking to our lawyers behind my back. She's not interested in your happiness. She's interested in your money." "You're being paranoid," he shot back, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face before Bella's voice, smooth as silk, cut through the tension. "Is everything all right, darling?" She glided into the room, a vision in emerald green, her hand immediately finding Julian's arm, her touch a possessive claim. Her eyes, cold and hard, met Seraphina's over Julian's shoulder. It was a declaration of war. The war was swift and brutal. Bella, an expert in psychological warfare, began a campaign to isolate Seraphina, painting her as a jealous, overprotective daughter who couldn't stand to see her father happy. She twisted Seraphina's legitimate business concerns into power plays, her warnings into attempts to control the family fortune. Julian, caught in the crossfire and blinded by a desperate need to believe in this second chance at happiness, was an easy target. The final battle took place in the boardroom of the Eleanor, the very heart of the Vance empire. Bella had convinced Julian to appoint her to the board, a move Seraphina had vehemently opposed. During a heated debate over a risky, ill-advised acquisition Bella was pushing, Seraphina finally laid her cards on the table. "This is a reckless gamble, and you know it," Seraphina stated, her voice ringing with authority. "This company was built on sound, strategic growth, not on the whims of someone who thinks a balance sheet is a fashion accessory." Bella gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of wounded pride. "Julian, are you going to let her speak to me that way? After all I've done to bring you back to life?" The ultimatum hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Julian looked from Bella's tear-streaked face to his daughter's defiant one. He saw a choice between a painful past and a glittering, easy future. He chose the future. "That's enough, Seraphina," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You will apologize to Bella." Seraphina stared at him, her heart shattering into a million pieces. It wasn't just that he was choosing Bella. He was choosing Bella over their shared history, over her mother's legacy. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I will not." "Then you can leave," he said, the words a death sentence to the life she had known. "This is my company, and I will not have you disrespecting my future wife." Seraphina walked out of that boardroom with her head held high, leaving behind the keys to the kingdom her mother had built and she had saved. She was an exile, cast out of her own home, her own family, by the very man she had dedicated her life to protecting. As she walked away, she could hear Bella's triumphant, soothing voice, the victor claiming her spoils. The exile was just the beginning of the pain. Seraphina's journey, a painful, solitary path that would lead her to build her own empire, brick by painful brick, fueled by the fire of betrayal.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
Julian married Bella in a lavish ceremony that was a grotesque parody of the love he had shared with Eleanor. It was a spectacle of wealth, a public declaration of his new life, and a final, definitive severing of ties with his past. Seraphina saw the photos online, a gallery of smiling lies. Her father, looking vibrant but hollow, and his new bride, a triumphant queen in a sea of champagne and fake admiration. The wedding marked the beginning of the end for the Vance hospitality group. With Seraphina gone, Bella moved with breathtaking speed. She was no longer just a board member. She was the queen consort, and she wasted no time in consolidating her power. She installed her own people in key positions, ousting loyal employees who had been with the company for decades. She rewrote the corporate structure, creating a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts that even a seasoned forensic accountant would struggle to navigate. And, most devastatingly, she convinced Julian, in his love-struck haze, to give her power of attorney and to restructure the family trust, the very foundation of their legacy. Under the guise of modernizing and protecting their assets, she systematically dismantled the financial fortress Eleanor and Julian had built, redirecting its wealth into her own control. Meanwhile, Seraphina, fueled by a grief that had sharpened into a diamond-hard resolve, was building her own empire. She started small, with a boutique hotel in a forgotten corner of Savannah, pouring all her pain and passion into its creation. She called it the Phoenix, a symbol of her own rebirth from the ashes of her former life. Her talent, honed at the feet of a master, was undeniable. The Phoenix became a sensation, lauded for its impeccable service, its stunning design, and the personal touch that had been the hallmark of the Vance name. She was building a new legacy, one that was entirely her own. The universe has a cruel sense of irony. Just as Bella's conquest was complete as she stood atop the ruins of the Vance Empire, Julian's health began to fail. It started subtly, a persistent cough, a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. Then came the diagnosis, a rare, aggressive form of cancer. The same reckless abandon with which he had chased life now seemed to be fueling his body's betrayal. The illness was a harsh, unforgiving mirror, forcing him to see the truth he had so desperately tried to avoid. Confined to his bed, the fog of Bella's influence began to lift. He saw the woman who had promised him a new life for what she truly was, a vulture who had been waiting for him to die. Her concern was a performance, her affection a mask for her impatience. He saw the business reports she tried to hide from him, the frantic, hushed phone calls she made to her lawyers. He saw the empire he and Eleanor had poured their souls into being bled dry, and he was powerless to stop it. He called for Seraphina. She came not out of a sense of duty, but out of the deep, abiding love that even the most profound betrayal could not extinguish. She found a man who was a shadow of a shadow, his body ravaged by disease, his eyes haunted by a guilt that was more painful than any physical ailment. "You were right," he rasped, his voice a fragile thread. "You were right about everything." The words were a torrent of confession, a desperate plea for absolution. He told her about the trust, about the power of attorney, about the web of deceit Bella had woven around him. He told her about the illegal dealings he had only just begun to uncover, the falsified documents, the embezzled funds. "She's a monster, Sarah, and I let her in. I let her destroy everything your mother and I built, everything we built for you." Tears streamed down his face, tears of regret, of shame, of a love for his daughter that he had almost lost forever. Seraphina took his hand, her own tears falling freely. In that moment, there was no anger, no resentment, only the heartbreaking tragedy of a family torn apart.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
Julian's death was a quiet affair, a stark contrast to the noise and flash he had embraced in his final years. The reading of the trust was anything but. It was held in the cold, sterile office of Bella's new lawyer. Bella, dressed in a ridiculously expensive black dress that looked more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral, was the picture of a grieving widow, a performance that was as flawless as it was sickening. The lawyer's words were a brutal, clinical execution of Bella's plan. Seraphina was gone. The trust, once a testament to a family's love and legacy, was now a monument to one woman's greed. Every asset, every property, every dollar had been redirected to Isabella Dubois Vance, beloved wife of the deceased. Seraphina was left with nothing but the echo of her father's last, desperate words. Bella's mask of grief slipped for a moment as she looked at Seraphina, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "It's a shame, really," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "If you had just been a little more welcoming, perhaps your father would have left you something." Seraphina met her gaze, her own eyes clear and cold. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The battle lines had been drawn. This was no longer about money or inheritance. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming her mother's name and honoring her father's final wish. As she walked out of that office, leaving Bella to revel in her ill-gotten gains, Seraphina was not a victim. She was a soldier on her way to war. Bella, secure in her victory, began to live the life she had always believed she deserved. She went on a whirlwind spending spree, a hedonistic tour of Europe's most luxurious boutiques and resorts. She was a black widow, celebrating the death of her mate, oblivious to the web being spun around her. She had underestimated Seraphina. She had mistaken her silence for weakness, her grace for surrender. Seraphina, armed with her father's deathbed confession and her own formidable intellect, was a force of nature. She hired a team of forensic accountants and private investigators, the best in the business. They descended on the Vance Hospitality Group like a storm, unearthing the years of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion Bella had so carefully concealed. Every falsified document, every illegal transfer, every shell company was a nail in the coffin of Bella's new life. The final move was a masterpiece of strategic brilliance, a move her mother would have admired. Seraphina didn't just go to the authorities. She went to the press. She gave an exclusive interview to a leading financial journalist, laying out the entire sordid tale. The grief-stricken father, the predatory new wife, the stolen legacy, the daughter's fight for justice. It was a story of Shakespearean proportions, and it exploded across the media landscape. The downfall of Isabella Dubois Vance was as swift and spectacular as her rise. The SEC froze her assets. The IRS launched a full-scale investigation. The authorities in multiple countries issued warrants for her arrest. She was apprehended at a 5-star hotel in Monaco. Her face, stripped of its expensive makeup, a mask of disbelief and terror. Seraphina watched the news from the lobby of the Phoenix, her own thriving, legitimate empire humming around her. She felt no joy, no triumph, only a quiet sense of peace. She had done it. She had honored her parents. She had reclaimed their legacy, not in the form of a trust fund, but in the form of justice. The Vance name, once tarnished by scandal, was now synonymous with resilience, with integrity, with the enduring power of a daughter's love. The heiress had played her gambit, and she had won. Won. She had won it all. The penthouse suite of the Phoenix had become Seraphina's war room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Charleston skyline, a city that would witness her resurrection. The conference table was covered in documents, ledgers, bank statements, and photographs, a mosaic of evidence telling the story of one woman's calculated destruction of a family legacy. Seraphina stood at the window, a cup of cold coffee in her hand, watching the sun rise over the harbor. She hadn't slept in 3 days. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but they burned with an intensity that would have made her mother proud. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't even just about justice. This was about honoring the memory of 2 people who had loved her unconditionally, who had built something beautiful, only to have it stolen by a woman who saw love as nothing more than a transaction. Her team of forensic accountants worked in shifts, their fingers flying across keyboards, scanning through thousands of pages of financial records. They were expensive, but Seraphina didn't care. She would spend every dollar she had to bring Bella down. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus Thorne, the ex-FBI agent leading her team of private investigators, walked into the war room with a triumphant gleam in his eye. He was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and a face that had seen too many dark corners of the world. He dropped a thick manila folder on the table. "We found him," Marcus said, his voice gravelly. "The accountant. His name is David Chen. He worked for Bella for 2 years before she fired him. He's been sitting on a gold mine of evidence, too scared to come forward." Seraphina's heart raced. Where is he? Atlanta. He's willing to talk, but he's terrified. Bella threatened him, told him she had connections that could make him disappear. Seraphina didn't hesitate. "Book me a flight. I'm going to Atlanta tonight." The meeting with David Chen took place in a small coffee shop in a forgotten neighborhood of Atlanta. David was a slight man in his 30s, with nervous eyes that darted around the room like a trapped animal. He clutched a worn leather briefcase as if it contained the secrets of the universe. In a way, it did. Seraphina sat across from him, her voice firm. "David, my father is dead. Bella destroyed him and my family. I need your help to make sure she never does this to anyone else." David's hands trembled as he opened the briefcase. Inside was a ledger, handwritten, meticulous, damning. "I kept this because I knew something was wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She was moving money, millions of dollars, into accounts that didn't make sense. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, trusts in Switzerland, LLCs in Delaware that existed only on paper. I asked questions, and she fired me. She told me if I ever spoke about what I knew, she would ruin me. Seraphina took the ledger, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. She flipped through the pages, each entry a nail in Bella's coffin. Transfers of $2 million here, $5 million there, all carefully disguised as legitimate business expenses. But David's notes revealed the truth. These were thefts, systematic and cold-blooded. "David, you're a hero," Seraphina said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to help me bring her down." Back in Charleston, the forensic accountants used David's ledger to trace the stolen money. They discovered Bella had siphoned off over $30 million, funneling it through shell companies to a single trust in the Cayman Islands under a false name. The beneficiary, Isabella Dubois Vance. But Seraphina wasn't ready to go to the authorities yet. She wanted the world to know what Bella had done. She wanted Bella's name to become synonymous with greed and betrayal. She reached out to Vanessa Hartley, an investigative journalist with a reputation for taking down the powerful and corrupt. Vanessa was a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a sharper pen. She had exposed senators, CEOs, and even a sitting governor. They met in a private room at the Phoenix. Seraphina laid out the entire story, holding nothing back. She showed Vanessa the ledger, the financial records, the emails, the text messages. She told her about her mother's death, her father's grief, Bella's calculated seduction, the exile, the deathbed confession. It was a story of Shakespearean tragedy. "This is the story of the year," Vanessa said, her eyes gleaming. "Maybe the decade, but I need to verify everything." "Take all the time you need," Seraphina said. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither is the truth." Vanessa spent 3 weeks verifying every detail, interviewing former employees, and tracing the money through international banks. When she was done, she had a story that was irrefutable, devastating, and ready to explode. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning like a nuclear bomb. The headline, "The Black Widow of Charleston: How Isabella Dubois Seduced, Married, and Robbed a Grieving Titan." 10,000 words of devastation, detailing every crime, every lie, with infographics showing stolen money and heartbreaking quotes from Seraphina. The story went viral within hours, shared on social media millions of times. News networks ran segments with legal experts, calling it one of the most brazen cases of financial fraud they had ever seen. Bella's face was plastered across every screen in America, accompanied by words like con artist, thief, and Black Widow. Bella, at that moment, was lounging on a 200-foot yacht in the Mediterranean, a glass of champagne in her hand, completely oblivious. She was living her best life, spending Julian's money with reckless abandon. She had just purchased a villa in the south of France, a penthouse in Manhattan, and a collection of jewelry that would make a queen envious. She felt untouchable, invincible. Her phone started buzzing incessantly. At first, she ignored it, annoyed by the interruption. But the calls kept coming, her lawyer, her financial advisor, her publicist, all frantic. She finally answered, her voice dripping with irritation. "What is it?" she snapped. "Bella, you need to see this," her lawyer said, his voice shaking. "It's everywhere. They know everything." Bella's blood ran cold. She opened her laptop, and the first thing she saw was her own face staring back at her, the headline screaming her guilt. She read the article, her hands trembling, her perfect facade crumbling with every word. Within hours, the authorities moved. The SEC froze every account connected to Isabella Dubois Vance. Her credit cards were declined. Her bank accounts were locked. The yacht was impounded by international authorities. Bella, still in her designer bikini and oversized sunglasses, was escorted off the yacht by armed officers, photographers, capturing every humiliating moment. The image of her, disheveled and bewildered, became the defining symbol of her downfall. The trial was a media circus. Bella's lawyers tried to paint her as a loving wife, unfairly targeted by a jealous stepdaughter. But the evidence was overwhelming. David Chen's ledger, the testimony of former employees, the irrefutable digital trail, it was a mountain of guilt. Seraphina was the prosecution's star witness. She took the stand on a crisp autumn morning, dressed in a simple navy suit, her face a picture of grace and strength. The courtroom fell silent as she began to speak. She told the story of her family, of her mother's vision, of the golden years when they had built an empire together. She spoke of her mother's death, of the grief that had consumed her father, of her own desperate attempts to hold everything together. Her voice trembled as she described watching her father transform under Bella's influence. "I watched my father lose himself," Seraphina said, her eyes glistening. "He was a good man, a loving man, and when my mother died, he was lost." Bella saw that vulnerability, and she exploited it. She didn't love him, she loved his money. And when she was done with him, she discarded him like he was nothing. The courtroom was silent, the only sound the quiet sobs of spectators moved by her testimony. "On his deathbed, my father told me the truth," He begged me to stop her, to make sure she never hurt anyone else. And that's why I'm here. Not for revenge, not for money, but for justice. For my mother, for my father, and for every family that might fall victim to someone like Isabella Dubois. When Seraphina stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The verdict came swiftly. Isabella Dubois Vance was found guilty on all counts. The judge called Bella's crimes a calculated, cold-blooded betrayal of trust. Bella was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 20. All of her assets were forfeited. Seraphina stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate, she simply stood there, her face serene, her heart finally at peace. Today, justice was served, she said, her voice steady. Bella tried to destroy my family's legacy, but she failed. Because a true legacy isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the strength of your character, in the love you give, and in the courage to fight for what's right. She paused, looking up at the sky as if speaking to her parents. Mom, Dad, I hope I made you proud. Seraphina walked away from the courthouse, returning to the Phoenix, her own empire built on integrity and love. She had lost her inheritance, but she had gained something far more valuable: her honor, her truth, and the knowledge that she had fought for justice and won. The heiress had played her final gambit, and in the end, she had checkmate.
Before you go, tap that like button, leave a comment to let us know what you think, and subscribe so you're always the first to hear our next story. Your support keeps these stories coming.